Human consciousness feels deeply subjective. It presents itself as a vivid, private theater of experiences, from the sharp sting of a paper cut to the rich hue of a sunset. Yet, if we open up a human skull, we do not find a glowing theater of light. We find a dense, gray, wet organ made entirely of biological tissue. This animated diagram illustrates a foundational rule of modern science, the causal closure of the physical domain. Notice how every node representing a physical effect is strictly connected to a node representing a physical cause. If the physical universe is a completely closed loop, mathematical models leave no room for an external, non-physical substance, like a soul or an immaterial mind, to interact with our biology. An immaterial thought cannot pull a physical lever. This leaves philosophers with a stark choice: either rewrite the established laws of modern physics or prove that the mind is an entirely physical mechanism. In the 1950s, philosophers U.T. Place and J.J. Smart took the second path. They developed mind-brain identity theory, a robust form of reductive physicalism. This theory argues for a strict ontological reduction. Place and Smart did not claim that the brain merely causes mental states, or that neural activity correlates with your thoughts. They argued that sensations are nothing over and above physical and chemical brain processes. A sensation and a brain process are the exact same entity, existing in the same space and time. To understand how this works, look at this split-panel equation graphic. On the left, we see a standard scientific reduction, the discovery that water is strictly identical to H2O. Similarly, scientists discovered that lightning is strictly identical to an atmospheric electrical discharge. Identity theorists apply this exact scientific framework to the philosophy of mind, asserting that a mental state is strictly identical to a specific brain process. These relationships are known as a posteriori necessary truths. They are facts about the universe that are necessarily true, but humans could only discover them after conducting empirical research. Just as chemistry mapped the structure of water and physics mapped the nature of lightning, identity theorists argue that neuroscience will map and ultimately erase the mysterious mind into pure biology. Why would philosophers like Smart feel compelled to erase the mind into the brain? The motivation lies in scientific efficiency. They relied on Occam's razor, the methodological principle dictating that the simplest explanation requiring the fewest new entities is the most likely to be correct. This animated grid represents the established predictive laws of physical science. Notice the tangled, chaotic node hanging off the edge labeled mental states. Smart called these nomological danglers, phenomena that sit awkwardly outside the rules of physical science. Dualism accepts these danglers, insisting that mental states operate under their own invisible rules. Identity theory uses Occam's razor to cleanly slice them off, asserting that only the physical grid exists. For physical science to be a universally valid system, human consciousness must be integrated into the biological grid. There can be no metaphysical leftovers. To evaluate this theory, we have to define its exact parameters. We do this by breaking down the distinction between a type and a token. We can see the academic precedent for this in standard philosophy texts, which often use a biological analogy to explain the concept. This infographic breaks the concept down. The top level shows the type, the general category of Canis dingo. The lower level shows 4 distinct, visually unique dingoes. These individual animals are the tokens that belong to the broader type. Translating this diagram to neuroscience gives us token identity theory. The lower level here represents specific time-stamped spikes on an EEG readout. Under token identity, one specific individual instance of pain is identical to one specific localized brain process. But the original identity theory goes much further. Type identity makes the sweeping claim that a general mental category is strictly identical to a general physical category across all instances. The classic textbook example states that the mental type pain is strictly identical to the physical type C fibers firing. Type-type identity is an incredibly rigid rule. It demands a perfect one-to-one mapping between a mental experience and a specific biological mechanism, making it highly vulnerable to philosophical attack.
This mathematical axiom building on screen is Leibniz's law, also known as the indiscernibility of identicals. It serves as the ultimate stress test for identity theory. If X and Y are identical, they must share all properties. This leads to the spatial location problem. Physical brain states have precise dimensions and coordinates. A C-fiber firing might be exactly 2 millimeters wide, located in a specific quadrant of the cortex. Look at this 3D brain model. The paradox becomes clear when we try to map an abstract thought, or the sensation of seeing a yellow patch, onto that precise physical coordinate.
An experience does not seem to possess a physical dimension. Identity theorist U.T. Place countered this objection by identifying what he called the phenomenological fallacy. Place argued that we mistakenly attribute the physical properties of an object being observed to the internal experience of observing it. When you look at a yellow square, your visual cortex processes the image, but your physical brain does not literally have to turn yellow or take up the exact spatial dimensions of a square to perceive one. A related critique dates back to René Descartes, the indivisibility argument. Descartes pointed out that the physical brain can be physically divided, but our subjective consciousness feels like a single indivisible unity. This objection has two major flaws. First, not all physical properties are divisible. You cannot take a room with a temperature of 80 degrees, divide it in half, and get 2 rooms of 40 degrees. Second, empirical medical evidence shows that consciousness is not actually indivisible. This medical illustration demonstrates a corpus callosotomy, or a split brain procedure. When surgeons physically sever the 2 hemispheres of the brain, the patient's consciousness literally splits, functioning as 2 independent streams of awareness. Modern neuroscience empirically undermines Descartes. Because physically dividing the brain can divide the mind, the evidence supports the physicalist claim that they are the exact same entity. But the most severe threat to type identity theory comes from philosopher Hilary Putnam's argument of multiple realizability. This comparative anatomy dashboard illustrates Putnam's critique. Remember the rigid rule of type identity? The mental type pain is exclusively and strictly identical to the human neurological type C-fibers firing. Now, consider an octopus. When exposed to a noxious stimulus, it reacts using cephalopy ganglia, a completely different physical structure. We can even extend this logic to a silicon-based alien life form, registering damage through inorganic circuits. Putnam laid a devastating logical trap. If pain strictly is human C-fibers firing, then any creature in the universe without human C-fibers is physically incapable of feeling pain. A dog, an octopus, or a silicon alien can clearly realize the mental state of pain through completely different physical architectures. Because of this, the strict identity between one mental state and one specific human brain state must be false. The biological chauvinism of type identity makes it an incredibly brittle theory when faced with the diverse physical structures of the natural world. Mind-brain identity theory brilliantly sliced away metaphysical ghosts using Occam's razor, offering a purely physical model of human consciousness. But it trapped itself by insisting on rigid, species-specific biological blueprints. The failure of type identity forced philosophers to evolve. It paved the way for more flexible frameworks, like token identity and functionalism, which allow different physical systems to run the same mental software. It leaves us with an enduring question. If the mind isn't a ghost, and it isn't strictly human biology, what are we?